We began this year talking about the cellular basis of life and then began investigating the five kingdoms of living things: bacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals, always working from simple to complex. During our study of the animal kingdom, we began with the simple invertebrates, including sponges, cnidarians, flatworms, roundworms, annelid worms, mollusks, arthropods, and echinoderms. Now we're ready to tackle the remaining groups in the animal kingdom, the vertebrates. These five groups of animals are the living things that have a backbone and include fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. As you can see on this classification diagram, we have kingdom Animalia at the top, and below the kingdom are the different phyla that fall within that kingdom. We see the 8 groups of invertebrates that we've already studied, and then the phylum Chordata. This contains all of the vertebrate animals. What do you hear in the word chordata? Do you hear cord like spinal cord? All vertebrates, including you and me, have a spinal cord that's protected by vertebra or backbones. Let's look and see the other characteristics that all vertebrates have in common. Like we just said, all vertebrates have a backbone protecting that spinal cord. But what else do we have in common? There's a lot of diversity in the 5 classes of vertebrates, but if we look at their embryonic structures, we see 4 features in common. Embryonic structures are those features that are present when the living thing is still developing, either in an egg or in its mother's womb. All vertebrates have a notochord, which is a structure that eventually turns into the backbone throughout development. They also have a dorsal hollow nerve cord, which becomes the spinal cord and brain. Dorsal, like a dorsal fin in a dolphin, just means along the back or top side, rather than along the belly, so it's just telling you about its location. We'll see these structures in the next slide. All vertebrates also have pharyngeal pouches, which become the gills in critters like fish, jaws, inner ears, and tonsils. The last common structure they all have is called a post-anal tail. This either becomes a muscular tail used for movement in fish or shrinks down and becomes vestigial or non-functional, like in humans. We don't have a tail. Humans do not have tails. This is not anything to do with the 3 bones in the vertebral column called your tailbone. But let's take a look and see what these structures look like. Like any model, this generic vertebrate embryo model is showing general features. A human embryo has the features as well as other human features, so it looks a little different. A turtle embryo has these features as well as others that are specific just to turtles, so it looks a bit different. Think back to when we were looking at cells in the beginning of the year. We started by looking at this round blue model with all of the organelles inside, a very generic model. But then I showed you a red blood cell model, and a white blood cell, and skin cells, and a brain cell, and a nerve cell, and all sorts of other cells. And even though they were all animal cells, they all looked very different from each other, despite having the same organelles inside, because they had different jobs. The same is true with any model. It's very generic to show common features, but the embryos of vertebrates will all look very different because they are different kinds of living things. This is a neat diagram to show what the 5 classes of vertebrates look like as they're developing. Remember that embryo is just a clinical term for developing baby. So at the early stages of development, you can see that the vertebrates have a lot of features in common. Look at that top row. But as they develop, the differences between them become much more clear, and by the end of development, they all look very different from one another. I want to be clear about what this is showing and what it's not showing. Scientists use embryonic development to look at common features and classify or organize living things with common features. But that does not mean that we evolved from these living things. Don't be confused. Humans did not come from fish or chickens. We have similar features in the beginning of our development because we're all vertebrates and we have those things in common. When we looked at invertebrates, we studied them from simple to complex to see that each group was increasingly more complex and had body systems that were also more complex. The same is true for vertebrates. They have body systems that are more complex than those of the invertebrates. For example, Invertebrates had a simple gut with an intake of food and basically just an intestine to pull out nutrients and then get rid of waste. Think back to our worm dissection. Vertebrates, on the other hand, have an excretory system that involves kidneys, which filter out waste, conserve water, and make urine. They also have complex brains that control both movement and senses, as well as the things our bodies do automatically, like breathing and controlling our heartbeat. These are called autonomic, which means the same thing as automatic. I don't know why they have two separate words. They mean the same thing. They're done by our brain without us having to think about them. Can you imagine having to remember to tell yourself to breathe or for your heart to beat? That would be a disaster. I'm way too highly distracted. Vertebrates also have a complete digestive system that is far more complex, including digestive glands, a liver to filter out toxins, a pancreas to produce insulin to help regulate blood sugar. And finally, we have a closed circulatory system, which means that we have a true heart, pumping blood around blood vessels that are connected to every organ in our body, ensuring that every cell in our body gets nutrients and oxygen to do the cellular processes so we can stay healthy in the most efficient way. So let's start with our simplest group of vertebrates, the fish. We can see that they're classified into three separate classes. So kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, which is with all the other vertebrates, and then our three classes. The jawless fish, or agnathans. These are things like sea lampreys. They have creepy, round, sucker-like mouths with a circle of teeth that latch on and drill into another fish that they feed off of. Super gross. The second class of fish are cartilaginous fish, or also known as chondrichthyes. Chondro means cartilage and ichthyes means fish. So these chondrichthyes literally just means cartilaginous fish. These are critters that are made of cartilage like sharks and rays. They have no bones, but do have a bone-like skeleton made out of cartilage. In fact, my favorite fish, which is the largest fish, is a cartilaginous fish. Any guesses? It's a whale shark, and not scary at all. Trust me, I'm a chicken and totally afraid of sharks. The final class of fish are the bony fish, which is what you normally think of when you think of fish. Like their name infers, their skeletons are made up of bone rather than cartilage, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Most of what you're catching when you go out on a fishing trip are bony fish. Things like pickerel, flounder, bass, northern pike, all of those. And most of what you see in a fish tank are bony fish, like our guppies, and a clownfish and mollies and all sorts of other critters. There's a huge diversity in bony fish. So what makes fish so special from other vertebrates? Fish have gills for breathing, paired fins, which also makes them bilaterally symmetrical, and a two-chambered heart. You can click on that link to even see the heartbeat. It's a little bit gross, but awesome. As we work from simple to complex, one feature that we'll look at is the number of chambers or sections in the heart. The more complex an animal is, the more chambers they have, making their heart more efficient to pump blood around their body. Let's look at some of the body features that make fish special. You can clearly see some common vertebrate features like a brain, backbone protecting the spinal cord, digestive organs like kidneys, a stomach, intestines. But something looks unfamiliar here. It's a structure called a swim bladder. This is an air sac that helps the fish stay upright in the water and float properly. You may have seen fish in a fish tank that were swimming oddly or even upside down. This is a sign of sickness that affects the fish's swim bladder, so they don't have the ability to swim upright anymore. It's really sad. Another feature that's unusual here are the gills. These are used for breathing, so water flows over them and back out, and the gill filaments inside the gills pull oxygen from the water. It diffuses into the bloodstream of the fish and then gets circulated around the body. That's how fish can breathe underwater without having any lungs. I talked earlier about fish having paired fins. You can see those here. There are dorsal fins. Remember, dorsal means top of the body. Caudal fins. Caudal just means tail. Ventral fins. Ventral is the opposite of dorsal and means belly or underside. And anal fins. You can figure out where all of those fins are located based on their name. The other feature I want to highlight here is the lateral line. This is a sensory organ on the outside of the fish that allows them to sense chemicals and movement in the water. So they know when something is coming because their bodies can literally sense that object coming closer. This not only allows fish to escape predators, but also allows school fish to move with synchronicity and communicate. Think about that scene in Finding Nemo where Dory and Marlin are looking for the EAC. Do you remember that? Remember how the little silvery fish made all those funny shapes really fast? Well, real schooling fish don't make ship shapes or shark shapes or talking fish shapes, but they can move in a group really quickly because of their lateral line. It senses the movement of the leader fish, and they all respond by changing their movement very quickly. Pretty nifty, huh? Another feature that we'll look at for each group is their method of reproduction. Giving birth with eggs is simpler than live birth, which is far more complex. And asexual reproduction is simpler than sexual reproduction. So as we're working simple to complex, keep those guidelines in mind. Most fish reproduce sexually and fertilize their eggs externally. That means that the female fish will lay unfertilized eggs, and then the male fish swims over to the pile of eggs and spreads his sperm over them so they can be fertilized. It's not very efficient. However, cartilaginous fishes like sharks and rays fertilize internally. Some keep their eggs in their uterus until they give birth, and others lay their eggs. Sharks that give birth are called viviparous. Viva is Latin for alive, and parous means bearing or to bring forth. So it literally means to bring forth live young. Those that lay eggs are called oviparous. Ova, like egg, and again, parous meaning bearing or to bring forth, so they are birthed or brought forth from eggs. You can see a picture of a shark egg in the top right-hand corner. Sometimes they're called mermaid's purses. They're pretty unique looking. You can even see the little shark body with the little yolk, his nutrient source feeding him. Working our way from simple to complex, we arrive next at the amphibian class. Amphibian is made of two Latin words, amphi meaning double and bios meaning life. This double life is referring to the two locations where amphibians spend their lives, both on land and in the water. The amphibian class includes 4 orders: frogs, toads, salamanders, and caecilians. Kind of a crazy looking word. You're probably familiar with the top 3 groups. Caecilians are probably the least familiar. They almost look like snakes, but they're not. If you look at this bottom right-hand picture, you can see they have no scales on their bodies and often are even without functional eyes. They live almost always underground in tropical regions of Central and South America, Asia, and Africa. So unless you travel or go to a zoo, you're never going to see them around here. Amphibians have 5 features in common that separate them from all other vertebrates. They have smooth skin with no scales, and their toes have no claws. To breathe, they have both gills and lungs, but also breathe through their skin, which is called cutaneous respiration. More on that later. Part of their double life, like a double agent, means that they're changing over their lifetime. They go through a metamorphosis process from a larva to an adult. Think about frogs. When they're born from frog eggs, they're called tadpoles. They look very different than an adult frog. Over time, they develop legs and their tail gets shorter, and eventually they walk up onto land. And you don't even see their tail at all. As part of this development, their heart goes from a 2-chambered heart, like a fish, to a 3-chamber heart, which we'll see in amphibians. So these guys are changing dramatically over time from a simpler organism to a more complex organism. As discussed earlier, adult amphibians have multiple types of respiration or ways to breathe. The first is pulmonary respiration. Pulmonary refers to lungs, so this is where gases are exchanged between the lungs and the air, breathing like you and I are familiar with. The second kind of respiration in adults is cutaneous respiration. Cutaneous is referring to your skin. So this is an exchange of gases between the air in the skin, if they're on the land, or the water in the skin, if they're in water, breathing more like fish, where the oxygen diffuses through their skin into their bloodstream. Our eyeballs have cutaneous respiration. You see this most notably when you're wearing goggles. On lab days, have you ever noticed when you wear your goggles and they're too tight up against your face that they fog up really fast? That's because your eyes are exchanging gases with the air around you and it has nowhere to escape. Frogs can exchange gases just like this, but all over their body. Amphibian bodies have 4 structures in common. I've showed all pictures of frogs here, but keep in mind that other amphibians have these as well. The first is a nictitating membrane. This is essentially a clear eyelid that allows them to blink and still be able to see their surroundings so they don't get eaten. The next is a tympanic membrane, which is an external eardrum so they can hear. I remember this because a timpani is one of those big brass-looking drums. They have really deep boom, boom, boom sounds on them. So timpani referring to drum, tympanic membrane, eardrum. The third feature is called a eustachian tube. We have these too. Some of you may have gotten tubes in your ears if you had chronic ear infections as a kid because your eustachian tube was too flat and it allowed fluid and bacteria to build up in your inner ear, causing an inner ear infection. They should be on an angle, and as you get older, they eventually angle out, and so you get your tubes removed or they even fall out. But amphibians have these too. The final body structure that amphibians have are called vomeron teeth. Think of these sort of like pieces of the scratchy side of Velcro. When amphibians like frogs eat, they don't have teeth to chew, but they use their strong tongue to press the insects or other food up against the roof of their mouth and grate it against those rough pads, and it helps them break up food. Kind of a gross thing to think about, but delicious if you're a frog. Our third group of vertebrates is the class Reptilia, or reptiles. These are often confused with amphibians, so let's see what makes them so special and unique from other vertebrate groups. Unlike the soft, smooth-bodied amphibians, reptiles have a dry body covered with scales, and any toes present have claws on them. Since their breathing is entirely with lungs, no gills in these guys, they have well-developed lungs with little air sacs inside called alveoli. Having these air sacs increases the surface area of their lungs and allows them to more efficiently exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. Similar to adult amphibians, reptiles have a 3-chambered heart their whole life, as you can see here. They have 2 little atria, the little round parts at the top, and 1 ventricle, which is the V-shaped portion at the bottom. So we've gone from fish with 2 chambers, 1 atrium and 1 ventricle, to amphibians with 2 as a larva and 3 as an adult. Now reptiles have 3, and we'll have to see if you can predict what birds and mammals will have as part of their chambered hearts. There are 6 separate groups of reptiles. The first 3, turtles, terrapins, and tortoises, are often put together in one group called turtles, but there are actually several differences between these 3 groups. The easiest way to tell them apart is by looking at their feet. True turtles have flippers, like Squirt and Crush from Finding Nemo. Terrapins have webbed toes, which you can see in that bottom right-hand corner of the split picture. And they're typically the critters you're going to find in pet stores that are sold as turtles. Like a snapping turtle is actually a terrapin. The red-eared slider turtles that you get at pet stores are actually terrapins. The top left picture is of a tortoise foot, which you'll notice has no webbed toes and is not adapted in any way for swimming. Tortoises are sinkers, not swimmers, as they prefer life totally on land. Groups 4 and 5 are lizards and snakes, pretty easy to tell apart. And then group 6 is the crocodilian group. That includes crocodiles, alligators, caimans, they sort of look like dark mini alligators, gavials, and their relatives. The most notable difference between amphibians and reptiles are their reproductive strategy, the way that they reproduce. While fish and amphibians both lay eggs, reptiles also lay eggs, but it's a much more complex egg called an amniotic egg. Their eggs have a hard or leathery shell which helps protect the baby inside, but also some internal features to help that baby develop inside longer so they have a better chance of survival once they hatch. The four features listed here, amnion, yolk sac, allantois, and chorion, are all features unique to an amniotic egg. Let's take a look at these in the picture on the next slide. You can see the baby reptile, aka an embryo, is in the center with the yolk sac containing nutrients attached to the stomach region of that baby. Near the bottom, you have the allantois, which stores the waste that the baby makes during its development until it hatches. Surrounding the little baby reptile is a fluid-filled sac called the amnion, which is thus there to cushion and protect the baby until it hatches. The one feature that's not pictured here is the chorion. This is a tissue paper thin layer that lines the entire shell and helps regulate what gases go in and go out of the shell. Bird eggs are also amniotic eggs, so you may have seen the chorion when you peeled a hard-boiled egg. It's that layer between the shell and the egg whites that feels sort of like a thin sheet of almost rubbery tissue paper. You'd also see a yolk in an air space. That's why your hard-boiled egg is flat on the bottom. But none of the other features since the egg was never fertilized and the baby didn't develop. Speaking of birds, our fourth group of vertebrates is the class Aves, or the bird group. Birds are pretty easy to identify and aren't often confused for other kinds of living things. They have winged appendages and bodies covered with feathers. You may have heard that birds have hollow bones, but this is not true. Bird bones are very light for flight, but they are not hollow. They have what looks like scaffolding on the inside to provide structure without making it solid. We'll see this soon. All birds also have a sharp, toothless beak. Anybody who's had a parakeet as a pet can attest to that sharpness. They are endothermic, meaning they regulate their body temperature, and have a 4-chambered heart. Did anybody guess 4 chambers for birds? So this is one layer more complex than the amphibians and reptiles before. This is the most complex heart, just like ours. We also, as mammals, have 4 chambers and is very efficient at pumping blood around our body. Here you can see a comparison of a human bone, which has bone tissue and marrow all the way through, versus a bird bone, which has that webby-looking scaffolding throughout. So while it isn't hollow, it is definitely much less dense, which is great because it makes the bones light enough so birds can fly. In addition to having very light bones and feathers for flight, birds have a few other body features that are specialized to their lifestyle. Their digestive system is made up of a crop and gizzard, allowing the seeds and nuts they eat to be ground up and digested more easily. Their fast metabolism and rapid heartbeat allow them to digest that food quickly so they can use the energy for faster movement and flight. The most characteristic feature that birds have is their syrinx. Not to be confused with a larynx. A larynx is a voice box in humans. A syrinx is a song box, and that allows birds to make the sweet sounds that we love. Check out these highlighted features on a bird skeleton. It's sort of a preview of what's coming next. Do they look familiar? These are bones that are also found in mammals. You can check out the Cornell Bird Lab link to learn more about birds. They have tons of info on them, from how to identify birds by their song and appearance, but this link will take you to the interactive bird builder, which lets you look at different body systems by piece and investigate them one at a time. Our final and most familiar group is the class Mammalia, or the mammal group. So we've gone from simple to complex, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and finally mammals. We mammals are pretty fancy and have a few advanced features that make us special. One of the most notable features of mammals are the way that we have mammary glands to make milk for feeding our young. Yes, even boys have mammary glands, but they don't have the right female hormones to tell those glands to make milk, so don't worry. We also have a special muscle called the diaphragm, which helps us fully inflate our lungs to take in air, oxygen namely, and release carbon dioxide. Like birds, mammals are also endothermic, which means we can maintain a constant body temperature. Different mammals have different normal temperatures. Humans should be around 98.6, whereas dogs should be anywhere from 101 to 102.5. Mammals also have hair and fur, which help us stay warm, as well as specialized teeth to help us eat different kinds of food. By looking at human teeth, you can tell that our bodies are made to eat both plants and meat, since we have molars for grinding plants and canines to tear meat. Compare that to a horse, which has very flat teeth, meant only for grinding plants. Most mammals give birth to live young, but we'll see on the next slide that there's a unique exception to that. When we group the over 5,000 different species of mammals, we do it by how they develop. That leaves us with three main groups: the placental mammals, the monotremes, and the marsupials. Placental mammals like humans, apes, horses, and many others develop inside the mother's womb. Monotremes are just weirdos. These guys are mammals that lay eggs, but they have all of the other features of mammals, so they get to stay in our group. Platypus and echidnas are examples of critters in the monotreme group. The last group is my favorite because it contains some of the cutest mammals, the marsupials. These critters do give birth to live young, but the babies aren't fully developed and ready to be on their own when they're born, so they finish that development inside their mother's pouch. You can actually take a flashlight and open that pouch and see the little baby in there. Do you have a favorite marsupial? From kangaroos to wallabies, they're all so cute. But wombats are my favorite. Look up a baby wombat on YouTube. You will not be disappointed. So we're done, friends. We've navigated all 5 kingdoms of living things. The last unit that we'll study is digging into our most complex animal group, the mammals, by learning about human body systems. Until then, great job with these notes, and we'll see you next time.